Hello, everyone. We are going to get started here in just a couple minutes. So if you haven't already, we have a couple of bags up here, TrailheaDX bags, or TrailheaDX, whatever the pronunciation is. I don't know for sure. So go ahead and grab a bag if you haven't already, and we'll get started here in a little bit. All right, so raise your hand quickly if you've ever been to a developer group meetup before. I see lots of new faces here, so we've got quite a few, but we've got quite a few new folks here too. So my name is James Lothry, and I and Andy Betcher, who I think stepped out for a little bit, we co-lead the Minnesota developer group for Salesforce here in town. And today I'll be giving just a quick recap of TrailheaDX, and then we have a few presenters, Brett Nelson, Davin, and Barry will be presenting on various topics, including Salesforce DX, as well as some Apex security and keeping security in mind while you develop. So if you're here for I was joking earlier, if you're here for the Dynamics user group, that's in a different building down the street. All right, so a little bit about the developer group. So we've been, on Meetup, we currently have about 550 some people on there. We have an average of 30 to 50 or so folks show up on average. And there's also about 300 people sign up on our success community group. So there's a little disparity there. So I encourage, if you haven't already done so, head over to the success community, search for the Minnesota developer group, or I'll send out this presentation later on too, and we have a couple of links in here you can follow to that group. So go ahead and sign up on there. And we have a couple, we do a couple announcements and questions and answers and stuff on there. So we also have a Twitter and a Meetup URL that you're all familiar with, hopefully. And then our cadence that we typically strive for is we try to shoot for about 3 to 4 times a year, maybe a little bit more. We don't quite, we don't meet that sometimes, but we're trying to pick that up a little bit here. We're also tentatively having one scheduled here for the end of September, so just keep that time slot in mind. And then again, today we're going to be talking about a little bit of a recap of TrailheaDX or TrailheaDX, whichever you prefer. I'll be doing that, and then Brett will be talking about Salesforce DX. So if you're not familiar with that, it's going to be a great presentation, a great new tool that Salesforce kind of announced at Dreamforce around Dreamforce time last year. And then the last presentation we have today is developing Apex with security in mind. And it's a very important topic for development, so please pay attention to that one. All right, so TrailheaDX. So it was the second year they put this on. Happened about June 28th, June 29th of this year in San Francisco, so similar place to Dreamforce. A few of the topics were, of course, Salesforce DX was a huge topic there. They touched on some Einstein work as well. Anybody familiar with Einstein or the predictive visioning and stuff and various services that go on there? So lots of interesting topics to discover there. Lots of integrations that Einstein has with Sales Cloud and Commerce Cloud, such as like predictive product selling based on your searches and your clicks and all that. There was a large Lightning component aspect to TrailheaDX too. Anybody doing Lightning component development yet at all? We got a few hands raised. So one of the cool things that I'm looking forward to is the Lightning testing service pilot, which is basically unit tests for Lightning components built on JavaScript unit testing framework like Jasmine. So that's some cool stuff. Also, real quick, I have a link at the bottom of this presentation. I'm not going to click into it, but I will send this out on the Meetup and the Success Community Group afterwards. So there are like 10, 12 or some session videos on there from TrailheaDX that they recorded. There's a PDF with a couple of different trails you can follow. It also has a bunch of hands-on session mini hacks as part of that, so you can kind of dive into Lightning components, Lightning or Einstein Vision, and all that fun stuff. So be sure to check that presentation out if you get the chance. All right. And without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Brett, who's going to talk about Salesforce DX. Thank you.
How about now? Okay. Hi, I'm Brett Nelson. I work at Magnet360, a Mindtree company, as a mobile developer, and I write at wipdeveloper.com, things that are development related. Salesforce DX, obviously it's big news. Originally announced at Dreamforce last year, and they expanded the details on it throughout the pre-release beta that occurred earlier this year, and gave out more details when they brought it to public beta at TrailheaDX. So you might be wondering what it is. It's the new development experience. It's a combination of different paradigms coming together. So rather than having, so it's a combination of source-driven development, which we'll talk about in just a moment, scratch orgs, an updated CLI, broader support for IDE, packaging 2.0, and continuous integration and a focus on continuous integration and continuous delivery. Some of these things you're probably wondering what they are or what they mean, so we'll talk about those briefly. Source-driven development is moving the source of truth from the Salesforce org into an external source control, like a Git or Subversion, or if you're really hip with the Microsoft stuff, TFS. So what this allows you to do is track changes. You can know who added something, who modified something, and this doesn't include just code, it's also the metadata information. Scratch orgs are created quickly on the fly. They're meant to be temporary, so you can spin up a new Scratch org in a matter of seconds, deploy your code to it, upload some sample data, and then run tests or create additional using the declarative tools inside the org itself, because you can log into and navigate it. You can create new information that wouldn't be necessarily available through the CLI, like if you wanted to create a custom object, add fields, you would be able to create that in the Scratch org, then pull it back down into your source control. It allows you to run tests. Originally, they're created empty. That's why they're so fast to create. They're also temporary, so they're a matter of days. They're not something you can deploy to and pretend to run an organization out of for the next 5 years. There's updated CLI tools. So part of it is the Salesforce DX command line interface, which is a combination of the existing tools and new endpoints that they've created, all bundled into one handy dandy interface that you can control from your command line terminal or bash, whatever. You can use it with production and sandbox orgs along with Scratch orgs, but it's primarily focused on the Scratch orgs. And it can, I already talked about that. The broader IDE support, obviously they're updating the force.com IDE to support the new Salesforce DX tooling, but they're also exposing language services. So if you use a different editor, if you're not a fan of the dev console in Salesforce, or if you're not a fan of using Eclipse, you can get Illuminated Cloud or Maven's Mate. And Maven's Mate has mentioned that they are releasing support for Salesforce DX in Dreamforce this year. They're building that out now. So you'll be able to do the same things as possible through the CLI, through user interfaces, without, if you're averse to typing in a terminal. So with that, the providers of these tools won't be recreating the same functionality that Salesforce has already built. The language services will expose the lexical descriptions of like what an Apex class is or what system global system values are. So you wouldn't necessarily, Like the person creating Illuminated Cloud doesn't have to go and make a custom version of that just because it isn't exposed. So the tooling support will be easier for third parties. Packaging 2.0, it's currently in beta. So if you want real greater information about it, I'd recommend signing up for the beta and getting the information from them. But it's included as some addition to the Salesforce DX because it allows you to create modules or like little logical segments of code to be deployed as one unit of work. So if you have a functionality you're building out, you can create a package for it, and you don't have to be building for the App Exchange. You could be an enterprise app, and you want to, or an enterprise shop, and you're building just for one function, like adding languages to all your contacts, because why not? And you can have all the tests, all the custom fields, and you can have any associated Visualforce or Lightning components bundled into that logical component and deploy just that to various portions of your delivery process. So it could be in your sandbox, it could be in your quality assurance sandbox, it could be then pushed to state or pushed to production, and you don't have to include any other packages that you're also working on at the same time. So it's isolated completely. It has versioning support, so you can specify which version you're working on. So if you add a certain feature at a certain point and you want to be able to roll back to just before that feature is enabled or was included, you'll have that option. All you need to know is the version number. You wouldn't have to remember how many different files were changed, how many different, or what different changes were made in those files. It also allows you to create base functionality, like with the language example. We could have a base functionality that creates the language feature on all your contacts, and then you could have another package that you're creating that expands upon that functionality, and then a third package that just wants to access the information but not actually modify it. So you'd be able to add base features in a base module and then access it from other ones if you're into like this would be a great example if you wanted to use a God object. For continuous integration and continuous delivery, they had a heavy focus on working with people during the pilot program while they're setting up their Jenkins server or their Travis CI so that they could run Salesforce DX on an external computer that's not a user. Build all the information, like build and run tests and deploy to an external server. So all that can be handled by a continuous integration, continuous deployment server. And really the difference between continuous integration and continuous delivery boils down to the point of where you want the code to stop. With continuous integration, you build it and then you can wait to release it. Continuous delivery is assuming that once everything is good, it gets deployed to whatever the next step is. And those can deploy directly to sandboxes. So that's a high-level overview of what was included. So I was going to briefly touch base on what some of the command line features are. And the command line features are organized by module. So like if you want to work with, there's primarily two modules that are included. There's the force module, and then there's a plugin module to manage the plugins. So this force CLI, if you get the Salesforce DX command line, you'll be able to look at all these commands just by typing sfdx space force and then -- help, and it'll describe every single submodule that's off of force and what it's supposed to interface with. So with the force source submodule, you're working with the source that's used for the Scratch orgs. So we're talking about pushing and pulling changes directly to and from the Scratch orgs. So if you have changes that you made on your local machine and you want to send it to a Scratch org, you push it, which is similar to like the git push command. If you created something through the declarative UI and you want to pull that back down into your local code so that you have those changes to commit, you use the pull command. If you do not do that, your changes in the Scratch org are going to be overwritten the next time you push to it, because it's everything, the source of truth is on your machine. It's not in the org. So you can also check status, so you can know what's changed locally and on the server. And the convert option converts the Salesforce DX format into the metadata API format. So you can take it from what's used to deploy to a Scratch org, because it's a different format, and convert it so it can be deployed to a sandbox. The org commands under the force module, they're related to creating, deleting, getting the description of, and listing all your orgs, and opening one. So if you know you're working on like a custom Apex or Visual Force page, you can open directly to that Visual Force page without having to navigate anywhere. I mentioned briefly earlier that you could upload data to a Scratch org so that it would be a consistent user or a consistent data template in all your Scratch orgs. You would do that using the force data. It has the you can point it at an existing org and export it, which generates JSON files that you would be able to then upload to a Scratch org. So you can point it at your sandbox, get your data exported based on a SOQL query, and then upload it into your Scratch org, and then be able to run tests against it. And that would be consistent on your Scratch org. The next person that checks out your branch's Scratch org, the CI server Scratch org, up until the point that you decide to change it. There's other features as well, as long with bulk updates, record creates, deletes, and whatnot. So for the metadata on existing sandboxes or your production org, you can use the metadata API still. The Salesforce DX CLI exposes commands to allow you to retrieve the metadata information from your existing org. You create an unmanaged package and then specify the name. Ideally, you would get an unmanaged package that consisted only of like one functionality. So you wouldn't want to create the managed package called, our entire org. You would create feature name, whatever, right? So, and then once you pull it down with the retrieve command, you can convert it so it can be in the different format, the new format for Scratch orgs. And like I mentioned, we'll look at that in just a moment. And it also allows you to deploy directly to a sandbox. And it wouldn't be development without Apex, I hear. So you can create Apex classes. You can execute anonymous Apex, get logs on your debug logs, run tests, and get the test reports after they're run. The test reports don't automatically return. You have to wait, since who knows how long it's going to take. You would get the run report. You would run the test, and then you would check the report status, and it would either return the results or tell you how much longer it's got, or tell you how far it's gotten so far. Visual Force, it allows you to create Visual Force pages and Visual Force components. I forgot to include, there's also one for Lightning, so it'll create an entire Lightning component, all the JavaScript and the component definition files and the CSS. So this is it's probably hard to read. This is the original metadata format. So it's one file. It has 41 lines. It has a description of a custom field. In this case, there's one called languages, and there's a custom field called level. I don't remember what they're from. They're from there's a sample org I have. I don't remember why I created those. So if you had 5 different teams working on this, they were all modifying the contact object, adding fields and whatnot. It would all be taking place in this same file. If you have 5 different teams working on 5 different features modifying the same file, it's going to cause some conflicts with handling changes. So with Git, that would be a merge conflict. Some of that could be because some people inserted something at the same line as another, like what the team A inserted something at the same line as team B. So some merge tools would be like, I don't know what to do. These are the same lines, but they're different things. To manage that and to separate it so that different teams would be able to work, or different features would be able to develop at the same time, this same contacts object is now split into 3 different files. One is the contact object itself, and then one different file for each field. Now you can have 5 different teams working on 5 different features, adding their own fields to the same object, and they're not going to conflict with each other unless they want to name something the same thing. In which case, you might, as long as it'll probably cause an issue if they use different types or different values. And here are the 3 different files themselves. So you have the actual object itself, the language field, which is just a text, and then the level, which was a pick list value. And it's actually 1 line longer than the 1 file, but it allows you to have it more modules, more modular, so that different people can work on different things at the same time without the conflicts. And there's more information. So you can sign up for a demo org. You can do there's 4 Trailhead modules associated with the Salesforce DX. There's the guide, the CLI guide, and there's this handy dandy cheat sheet somebody created that's shared on Google Drive. And if you don't want to type all those in individually, you can go to bit.ly/sfdg-dx, and there's a web page that has the links for all of them. I mentioned mentioned IDE support. If you use Visual Studio Code, somebody's already created a plugin to make use of Salesforce DX in the plugin. I'll add a link to that on that webpage as well, and in the slides for when they're distributed later. So, any questions? So, a scratch org is temporary. So if you mark it for deletion, it's going to be deleted within a couple days. But if you don't mark it for deletion, it's still going to go away in a couple days. So dev org, I don't know how long they last, but the one I signed up for 1.5 years ago is still running. So they're made to be temporary. They're not supposed to be long-lived entities. And that allows them to be spun up fast. And then you can have your CI server spin up one, deploy the code, deploy the data, run tests, and then mark it for deletion. And that could happen in a matter of minutes. So.
Talk about the features that you can do with scratch orgs a little bit, or choose the addition.
Oh, I forgot that. Yep. This isn't my computer. So with scratch orgs, there's a scratch org definition file that you can use when creating a scratch org. So you can specify what features you want on a scratch org. So by default, the examples all come with Salesforce 1 or the Lightning experience enabled. But there's other features that you would be able to turn on. There's a list that you would be able to get from the, I believe it's in the DX setup guide or the CLI guide that has a more complete list. There are some features there's hundreds of features available. They're not all necessarily, not everything is available that you can do in Salesforce right now, but they're adding things based on feedback. Another thing is there are some things that are not currently supported. It's brought to my attention that some metadata information is not exposed through the metadata API. Since Salesforce DX is built on existing tools, those are not necessarily supported either. I believe person's account was the example that was cited. So, any other questions?
What good is the command to create like a visual force page or a class? You're just creating it, you're not editing it. Why wouldn't you just go into the scratch org, create it there, and then you could edit it?
If you go into the scratch org, create it there, and start editing it there, then you have to go back to your local environment, pull it back down, commit it to your source control. One thing this does is it's exposing it so that other tools can make use of it. I mentioned Visual Studio's code, and I mentioned Illuminated Cloud and the Force.com IDE. They're going to be able to use the same services to create a Visual Force page, and you start editing them in your local environment. And then when you push next time to this to your scratch org, those changes are pushed up to the scratch org. So does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
So far, where I work, we're mostly just sort of make a couple of tweaks in developer console. If you want to have a backup, you could use it, pull it down, and you basically make links to the bridge to a web file for the checkpoint. Is there anything that this really is probably going to enhance for a place like mine?
Well, it's going to make it easier to pull your changes down. Some I've seen examples where some metadata information is pulled down from an org, and then they try to push it back to the same org, and it's a conflict. So it'll prevent things like that happening. But so unless you get more dev heavy, I don't know if.
That was kind of the impression I got, but I wanted it.
Or I could say it's the future. Adopt it now. So.
Are you guys doing continuous integration in your company?
Not even close.
Okay, so
It's more like you change 3 lines of a trigger because you came up with something else you wanted to do.
so exactly. So these, like, as a developer, is great, right? You're using this as a new IDA tool, and then you have your code consolidated. But then you can take it even further, right? What if you have? I don't know how you guys do that, but in our teams, we have somebody who's going to be doing that continuous integration. You have everybody deploying from the same place and pushing data to the same place, and then another person is just going to be merging those changes into a whatever developer environment you guys have. So.
So like with the Scratch orgs right now, they're current. Like if you have a production org, you're limited to 50, and by limited, I mean who wouldn't want 50 different orgs to play with? If you're developing for the App Exchange and you have a business org, you have limited to 40. So you would be able to have a team of, we'll say, 30 people working in 30 different orgs, and then still have extra orgs for integration. So those 30 people decide to merge everything back to master at once because, I don't know, they're crazy. And now you have an org that's set aside specifically to test all those changes together. And then once that's accomplished, you can push it to a sandbox, and you can have your QA people go through and run through everything with the existing data that's been pulled down from your production org. So they'll be able to run all those tests through the QA process, or run all the user acceptance stories through the QA process and all the tests that were developed against live data, not something that was manufactured, possibly handcrafted by a developer, because who trusts those people? So, exactly.
What?
Anything about what the data limits are going to be like in this Scratch org? I know they said it was going to be limited.
I haven't heard. If I did hear, I wasn't paying attention, which is entirely possible.
I think it's similar to a developer org.
Yeah.
So 10 days or 20 days or something like that.
Yeah. It's features of it are going to be included with every production org. If you have a production org right now, you can go and enable the dev hub in your production org, and then you would be able to start playing around with it. It's available. It's not necessarily something they recommend for doing your production work with. So if you already have an org, you should already have it. If you don't have an org, or if you want to play around with it as a demo without actually risking anything touching your production org, I'd recommend signing up for a demo org, which is the top link. It's temporary, so if you wanted to access data similar to your production org, you would have to use the force data endpoint and do the retrieve, and then it would generate the JSON files that you would be able to upload to the demo org and to the Scratch orgs. So.
Isn't it true that if you enable the dev hub or going back, and then you can't disable it?
Are you saying you'd like to just tip your toe in there?
Well,
I didn't look into that. It's possible that once you enable it, that there is no going back. I think it might be.
Does that make any permanent change though? I mean, if you turn it on,
Like if you turn it on and then stop using it,
right.
I don't. As long as you're not.
Is there any negative ramifications turning it on? It really kind of makes sense. So you can't turn it off, but can you walk away?
Have you met people?
I was trying to. It was a leading question.
Yeah. It's not a big deal as long as your people follow whatever standards you have. If you would, as an organization, decide you're not going to use it, but then you have a rogue developer running around and running amok, that could potentially be an issue. But as long as you're not pushing directly to production, which, pro tip, don't do it. Yeah. I'm not sure if how permissions would affect it. So I don't have an answer for you at this time. I will try to find it for you, and maybe I'll send it out on Twitter. Would you want to try firing it up against like your production org, which be okay?
And if you give us a little background on where you are, more background, so we can help you more. So right now you have only worked with developer environments. Okay.
In your production org, you would go to setup, search for dev hub, and that's where you would enable it. You wouldn't want to make changes and push them directly against the production org, but since you have multiple sandboxes, you still enable the dev hub in the production org, make the changes in Scratch orgs, push them to the first sandbox in your pipeline, and then manage the change sets going up to the production org the same way. Well, I don't recommend starting off with "here, hold my beer." Some things that might scare them is the fact that it doesn't necessarily allow direct access to the production org with the CLI, because you already have access through that with your credentials. So there's nothing to stop you from making the metadata APIs directly against calls using the CLI directly against your production org now. So I don't think, unless they're terrified of you doing that now, which you can do, there's any additional risk. Like, there's no process inside of your production org that automatically takes changes from one sandbox and pushes it live. Correct. Yep, you would still be able to generate sandboxes and do, as long as you don't give them rights to make changes directly to production, you would still be able to. Yeah. No, they should be able to spin up their own Scratch orgs based on your credentials, or their credentials. So. I'll have to verify that. Yes. Each production org would be its own dev hub. So. Spelling. So they started off with environment hubs, and I believe they transitioned to calling it the dev hub. So, because depending upon when you get the documentation from in the pilot program, they had different wordings for that, and they've cut back on changing wordings. The dev hub is your main org, so it's the org that you would ideally it's your production org. So that's where you would go and manage all of your Scratch orgs from. So you would be able to go in there and see that Bob has like 5 different Scratch orgs, and Jan over here is being crazy and just using 3 for 5 different features, and you'd be like, why aren't you have one for each feature? So. Yep. In setup, there's a dev hub. When you enable it, you get a dev hub app in your org, and you can look at who has who spun up orgs, how long they've been alive for. So some generic information.
And when you spin up a scratch org too, it prompts you like with the OAuth kind of login screen. So you can say force org create, or I think that's similar, some command like that anyway. And it spins up a login screen like you see on login.salesforce.com. So you just enter your credentials in there, and then it does an OAuth process, and then eventually creates that scratch org. And then like we were kind of alluding to, you can really kind of connect to any sort of org. Like I could even take a scratch org and deploy it to my developer org if you want. It won't get recorded essentially in the developer org. It'll get recorded in whatever hub org that I initially set up the Salesforce DX with. So there's kind of some tricks and stuff you can play with in that regard as well.
Was this gift time?
Yeah,
sure. All right. So who can name the type of org that was created for Salesforce DX? Okay, that was too easy.
Who got it first?
Well, there's a guy over there that raised his hand.
All right. So you are now the proud owner of a TrailheaDX lantern. Congratulations.
I guess I have another one. At this point, would Salesforce DX, would you call it a finished product? Okay, well.
First person to raise their hand wins.
Okay, if you have, if you come up with any questions, feel free to tweet them at me, BrettMN, or you can go to that bit.ly link, sfdg-dx. There's probably a contact form there, and you could either send them via email or the contact form, and I would be more than happy to try to find an answer for you.
So you said you could do data load right from the command.
Yep.
But I'm assuming that there are rules around how that data is formatted. Can you kind of, at a high level, walk through how that would work?
When you use the export command, it'll using a SOQL query, it'll export JSON files in a JSON format. So if you're familiar with that, the format would have to be the same. So you would have IDs. It would be basically like with the contact example, ID, first name, last name, and it would be have any additional fields that you've added.
So the first premise would be you're exporting it out of one org and using that same data to import it to your stack.
Correct, but once you do that, you can start playing around with it in the text editor. So that would be data. Who said that? No, it's so the force data tree export is exports from your org into for consumption through the import command, and what the format it exports it into is okay. Yeah, that's a different command. So that's for bulk upserting into the org. So they're similar. Sorry, that's at the bottom end.
So I was going to ask, when you do the import, you're exporting it out to the JSON file. Does it graph or does you specify the ID value to maintain that with parallel records for related load? Or would you have to recreate all the data?
So full disclosure, I haven't done it yet, but in the examples I've seen, the IDs were already filled in. So all those relationships, in the example I've seen, they had one JSON file that you specified for the import, and then two additional JSON files that had the actual values in them, because in the primary JSON file, it just referenced the other two, and those IDs were already filled in. So the relationship should be maintained, I would imagine, unless it changes it on the server, and then it would be like, why have them there? So. Anything else? Want to talk about the weather? Thank you.
All right, welcome everyone. My name is Davin Leier. I'm a senior dev and capability leader here with Magnet 360. I'm going to talk a little bit about different secure coding styles or standards within Apex. How many people have taken the secure coding exam? Anybody? Not a normal certification, just on the website. One of the Salesforce references has the secure coding. We've taken it. I'll have a link later on one of the slides that shows where you can go and take a look at it, along with basically everything we're going to show here, these different security topics. Some of the main things that it highlights, cross-site scripting, that's a big one. Essentially, if you don't know what it is, it's any scripting that allows you to manipulate the HTML on your site or another site. Not a good thing. SOQL injection, very similar to SQL injection. Key feature of Salesforce, though, you can't do updates, deletes, anything like that. You can only do selects in SOQL. But it is still dangerous in Salesforce since it does let you return data you may not be authorized for. Other things, cross-site request forgery. This is really more applicable to other types of sites. The Salesforce platform just prevents it. Not something you really need to worry about unless you start somehow incorporating other sites or applications into yours. The secure communications cookies. Really all this says is if you're communicating with an external site, it has to be over HTTPS within Salesforce. That includes pulling in external references to images. If you're using an external JavaScript library or any type of scripting language like that. Best practice, load it in as a static resource. Salesforce doesn't explicitly make you do that, but again, best practice, put it as a static resource. Storing secrets, this is where you get into some of the PII data or the HIPAA data that you might have in your site. Each piece kind of has its own standards and requirements. Make sure you're following along with those, like PCI requirements, encrypting data, hiding it, really governing access to who might have that. The arbitrary redirects, we're not going to cover it today, but this says whenever you're redirecting from Apex or from Salesforce to another page, another site, make sure that you are validating that you're sending it to the correct site. For example, if you specify like your return URL as a parameter for your URL, you want to make sure that you check where you're redirecting to. Somebody can't just type in their own URL for that return URL parameter and send them off to their own site. Access control, again, really applies to something other than Salesforce, but your external applications or websites. References, directory traversal. Somebody can't just go www Google /images /rafa /whatever and get access to something they shouldn't have. A big control around that within Salesforce is your field level security or your CRUD credentials. Lightning. Who has built any Lightning components? Any? A few people. So you may have seen a lot about locker service. It's caused a lot of problems with a lot of applications. They've been making constant updates to it, so it's getting a lot better. But what it does just provides some extra security rules around the Lightning components. And the reason for that is because the JavaScript running within the Lightning component is actually served up from a different domain than what the Visualforce pages are that it might be running on. So it allows those two applications or two domains to talk seamlessly between each other, but only those two and not some external systems. One of the other things to keep in mind with Lightning, the controller classes must have the with sharing keyword, no exceptions. You're saying, well, what if I want to surface any record I want to? There's ways to get around that. You would essentially have a helper class that is running without sharing, being called from the Lightning controller. And then a big thing to keep in mind as well, if you're building Lightning components, the CRUD and FLS permissions are not enforced by the Lightning component. So you can't rely on your org level or org-wide permission sets or sharing rules. You have to code explicitly for that in the Lightning controllers. Also, a couple of things today, Marketing Cloud app security. We won't get into that. Who uses Marketing Cloud? Anybody work with it? Oh, Good. Then some of the HTML5, newer HTML5 features with the secure post message and secure WebSockets. Not going to talk about those today either, but there is some references to those. They'll be up on the screen a little bit later. Yes? That's my understanding of it. It's probably the best way to describe it. If you're doing any Lightning development, you want to make sure that you have locker service enabled in your org as well. That'll prevent a lot of headaches in the future. It's when it becomes mandatorily enabled. Here's the reference that I talked about. If you wanted to register for that security quiz, you can go to this address. The coding guidelines page, that essentially gives some in-depth details on each of those security topics I just went over. And then Trailhead, if nobody's taken it yet, there is a nice little module that kind of illustrates the cross-site scripting and SOQL injection vulnerabilities. That top one, the custom dev org sign up. What Trailhead does, they give you your own developer org that's preloaded with a bunch of classes and data to essentially walk you through examples of it. We're going to see some of that today as I go through it. All right, so I'm going to see if I can do this. Example of the cross-site scripting. Let me see. I have. All right, so here's the dev org from Trailhead. What we're going to do, show an example of cross-site scripting. So the first example, everybody can hear me all right? Right? I might have to put this down and yell. Find my spot. Nah, that's all right. Yeah, I'll figure this out.
Fun in the pictures.
So an example. This is just a freeform text area. Lets the user enter in anything they want to. So I'm going to put in essentially some HTML within this block. And if I'm just a user, I can say, go ahead and create the scroll. And if you notice, it takes exactly what I've entered in this text area, and it drops it up here as a URL parameter. It's unchecked. It simply takes this and writes it back out of the page. You see I'm getting a blank, a broken image, and if I mouse over it, you get this JavaScript pop-up. Now, luckily, this is just an alert message, but more advanced JavaScript, you could say, put a mod overlay, a modal window on it with a form that asks the user for please enter your username and password, redirects them to an external site, things like that. So it really demonstrates the dangers of what you can do with cross-site scripting and why you need to prevent it. So let me back up, bring this up again. Taking a look at, and hopefully everybody can see this in the back all right, but here's the Apex code that essentially generates that page. And what you're looking at, some of the highlighted areas that are the bad pieces of the code. So right here on lines 8 and 9, where you take that query parameter, drop it directly into a text field. All they're doing here is simply stripping out any line breaks, dropping it into the output text, and then the visual force to go along with it. If anybody, hopefully you can see this. Can you read it all right back there, Rafa? Do you need me to try and zoom in? I wonder if... All right. So I'll try to explain what's happening. Down here at this area, what's happening is using JavaScript, they're taking that output text value and dropping it directly into in the inner HTML of the page, which is why it's unchecked. The user can essentially enter in any HTML or JavaScript in that block, gets injected right into the page. So how do we prevent against it? There's a few different ways. The first way would be to essentially have a whitelist of acceptable values for that text area. Not really practical unless you go through the process of stripping out any open and closing tags or any special characters, using regular expression. The second example, within Visualforce, use the JS encode and HTML encode features, functions. You can see this is what it would end up looking like, where you've wrapped HTML encode around, or excuse me, JS encode around HTML encode around the actual output text. So if I back up to what that page looks like, Visualforce, you can see right here, they just dump the text out directly. You want to drop in the HTML code. And the reason you have the double functions is because how Salesforce processes the different contexts of it. Since it's run in a Visualforce page, but putting JavaScript in, you have to first escape all of the HTML, and then you escape the JavaScript, and you essentially get the proper rendering. The next way is using the Apex eSAPI library. Anybody familiar with that? Had a chance to work with it or have seen it? Okay. Again, we'll have a link at the end of the page. We'll talk about that a little bit more detail. So let's take a look at how we can fix it. So I'm just going to bring up the actual Visualforce page of it. We can go ahead and edit this and update this text. Great scroll, refresh. One more time. So when I click that now, you can see everything's properly escaped, and you get the actual text that the user typed in instead of the rendered HTML. Right. Next piece on cross-site scripting. There are some built-in safety features within Visualforce. I just wanted to highlight what those are, to give you some examples. So show of hands, if anybody can see this. This might be tough, unfortunately. For the first example, would you say that this is or is not vulnerable to cross-site scripting, outputting the merge field directly from a Apex output tag? Is it? Who thinks it's safe? Who thinks it's not safe? Who has no opinion on it? All right. The next one, output text using escape equals false. Safe? Not safe? Next one, wrapping it in the output text tags. Safe? Unsafe? All right, let's see. So the first one, it is not safe. Sorry, it is not vulnerable to cross-site scripting. And the reason is Visualforce has the built-in safety checks when you use output text. It'll HTML escape anything for you. The next one that uses escape equals false, obviously that is vulnerable. You're saying render the HTML just as it might be entering the page. The second one, where it's wrapped in the output text, same functionality as if you use output text with the value parameter. It is safe. Anything is HTML escaped automatically. A few more examples. Within style sheets, if you try to use dynamic styles anywhere. Safe or unsafe? Who thinks it's safe? Who thinks it's unsafe? What about just dumping it out using the open brackets as a variable? Who thinks that's unsafe? What about within JavaScript? Hopefully everybody realizes that's not safe after the last example. And the last thing we have, using output label and saying escape equals false. All right, so again, if you're trying to use dynamic styles, that is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. You have to be sure to wrap that the output tags using HTML code, a JavaScript encode, or a combination of the two. Using a simple outputting the text variable or outputting a variable, that is not vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Again, Salesforce has built-in protections for you to help handle that. JavaScript, again, that is vulnerable. You want to be sure you JSON encode and HTML encode anything you have there. And the last one, output label, would normally be safe from cross-site scripting. It is one of your normal Visualforce tags. But since you're using escape equals false, you're allowing any HTML to be rendered within that tag. All right, questions about cross-site scripting that I can answer? All right, Barry's going to come up and talk to you a little bit about some of the SOQL injection pieces.
Thanks, David. All right, so my name is Barry. I am another developer at Magnet 360. Next, I'll be showing you some SOQL injection. And essentially, SOQL injection is, as mentioned in the previous slide, it's basically when you have user input being put into a SOQL query that then creates undesirable results, whether it's grabbing data you don't have access to or just kind of screwing around with data in general. It's definitely pretty nasty, and it actually happens more often than you think when you're just creating code off the bat. And I clicked on the wrong slide. So here's sort of an example, and I'll be showing similar example in the org. Oh, maybe I didn't escape that properly. So if I go into the Trailhead org, and we'll hop into the SOQL injection side. And the nice thing about the Trailhead too is that you just sort of get a different app for each kind of security vulnerability. Whether you have cross-site scripting, you have SOQL injection, you have open redirect, and you can dissect all the code. A very sensitive trackpad. You can go through and sort of just check all the Visualforce pages too, check all the Apex controllers, and the exercises they give you have you manipulating those classes and lets you sort of go into and solve the problems yourself, so you know how to code securely.
Hey Barry, would you mind bumping up the text just a little bit on the screen?
Yeah. How's that look? Great. So here we just have a basic search. We have search by title right here. Let's just type in the title of a book, which I know exists in the table. So we see here, works just like you'd expect. But now let's commit a little a felony right here, and let's inject some SOQL. So instead of putting in a title of the book, I'm going to essentially just type in, and thank you, autofill. I'm just going to type in this string right here, which kind of resembles part of a query.
Zoom a little bit more, Barry, please. Can you zoom in? Is it possible?
Yeah. Sure. Maybe that's old. Is that too big? Or?
That's awesome.
All right. Yeah, so right here, we just have %sign and performance rating is less than 100 and name like blank. So you'll see here that this is sort of a query. And if we do perform search right here, you'll see we actually get more than just saying miss or just specifying a title. Instead of the title, we're actually getting all the books where the performance rating is less than 100. And so, as Davin mentioned, these queries can't necessarily manipulate your data off the bat. But if you, for example, have a little section right here, like a column that's just modify or delete or something like that, you can actually end up deleting data that you don't have access to, whether it's something that you have your own like employee PIN number or something. You put in here, you have your information, you have some relevant records, they could be modified or deleted if you're able to just override the query and display things. So you can actually manipulate data fully depending on the context. And that's what makes SOQL injections just such a big concern, is that if you don't care for it, you could have some data deletion or data manipulation. Let me. This would be someone sort of in Salesforce, or I guess if you expose sort of a service externally.
What about a
that
community?
does.
A community.
Oh, that too, yeah. And like that, or
Yep.
any external site that's making controller calls for Apex. If they have,
We're mostly worried about people who know what they're doing and are sitting down, plugged into whatever it is that's vulnerability.
yeah, I mean, if they have access really to the endpoint or service, external page, community, and they are aware of how to do something like that, yeah, that's definitely a point of concern.
Yeah, some good example, if you have like a community or a partner community where you have people who are competing to each other, you have different prices for each person. And if they know, like for example, somebody got another developer from them, they know, okay, they are filtering by my group or my company, and they know, how about what's the price for the other company? And then you can get to filter by them and see their prices. So that's a huge problem.
Yeah, and this kind of goes hand in hand too of making sure that you have field level security and you have that with sharing keyword, because there are operations like delete that if you have like a without sharing Apex class, you can just do whatever you want. You can, if there's a button for delete or if there's any way you can modify the data, if some admins didn't give or didn't get rid of those permissions, really you could do whatever, especially if it's a without sharing class. So that just further emphasizes the need to have that wherever possible. And as Davin mentioned before, that you can have sort of a class for specific calls that is just in a without sharing class, one that's just mainly used for making SOQL queries or DML operations in the without sharing context. If you have your normal classes, there's really no reason to have without sharing if you can just do it from sort of a helper class. And that way you can sort of protect against operations you don't want, or if you have to do half of your operations are with sharing, half are without, it's best to just put it all in one, make sure your entire class is secure with the with sharing keyword. So hopping back into this example we have here, so you'll see we have more data than we want displayed here. And I don't have your keyboard shortcuts. So let's hop back into here. And so, and of course, this isn't great to look at either. That's a little small. But I'll kind of go through it. So here we just have where we're conducting the search. Here you'll see that we have our dynamic SOQL. And this is sort of the first point of concern. Whenever you have dynamic SOQL, this is where you have to really watch out for the potential for SOQL injection. Because unlike static queries, dynamic SOQL doesn't perform any magic on the string when you run database.query. If you have a static query and you use bind variables, which are the little colon next to your variable name, it will know to sort of escape those types of things. But in this case, we just have a dynamic query. And we have our where clause blank right now. And going into this loop, we'll see that we're adding to our where clause, taking in this textual title. And so this is basically the input field that the user had. They specified if it was good, just the name of the book. Or if they're trying to commit SOQL injection, they would just put in that string here. And you'll see here that normally the query is just checking like. It's making sure that, oh, if this contains this string. But as you may have noticed in the long string we entered to perform SOQL injection, we actually added in this ending right at the start. So basically it closed that up. And then we did and performance indicator, I think, is less than 100. So it essentially just closed off this bit of the query and then sort of performed its next step by saying and this or this. And so here's where you can just string along whatever you want. So if you wanted to just grab everything, you could say or ID like %, and then you pretty much have access to everything. So it's very, very easy to sort of get access to all the records just through the use of overriding it, especially if it's in sort of an easy to hack form like this. And you'll see here it's just database.query, and then we get more records back. So kind of ways to get around this is that, number one, you could make sure that your strings are checked for, see if there's anything that could possibly cause SOQL injection. Again, similar to sort of the cross-site scripting whitelisting example, it isn't really that easy to sort of just say, hey, if it contains this combination of characters, just kill them out, especially too, since we have some features already in our available for our Apex that we can just use. One of these being the string.escape single quotes method. And here, kind of like how we had to perform the query in the text box by doing %, quote, and then blah, blah, blah. By doing the string.escape single quotes, it'll just add a little escape character to it. So they wouldn't be able to perform the query they're looking for. Instead, it would just search for that string like it should. And then also too, the object isn't checked to see if the user has access to it. And this is kind of, you'll see here we have a method right here, call to get describe, as well as is accessible. And this is kind of what we were mentioning before, that Lightning doesn't really take your permissions into account. So this would be an example of a method that you would do in order to just make sure, yes, user has access to this, you can do it. There's also is updatable, is deletable, and then you can check from there. So using these methods are a good way to combine with field level security and make sure that you're not doing things that you can't, especially when you get to without sharing classes, because that's where big trouble happens. And so here you can check access to the fields. You just say is accessible is there. And then, of course, the schema has many different chains of method calls where we're just getting the specific field name on the S object and check if it's accessible or not. And this is something that you can just like keep by. If you look it up, you can look up in the API document to just know what each one of these does specifically. But if all you really care about is just getting a field on a particular S object, you just need this long string. So besides those methods, if you can use static queries, like I mentioned, it's the bracket notation ones, as they'll just be more flexible, it'll escape things, and two, it's less likely to break too if you're just debugging code, as during compile time, usually there's an issue. So when you can, don't use dynamic SOQL, but if you absolutely have to, using sort of these methods we have in mind is a good way to sort of prevent that. And so some resources. Here there's a code scanner, which is pretty nifty. It lets you sort of scans all your Apex, Visualforce, checks for things. For example, possibilities for SOQL injection, as well as some things like, I believe, checking that there are system.assert methods in your test classes, which is not necessarily something that's required, but it's definitely really best practice to have. And so the code scanner sort of gives you like a little health evaluation of it. And it'll just say, these are the classes that are up for concern. And it's nice too, if you're working on something and you want to kind of show people that, hey, what I wrote is good, like it passes all the security checks, having that is good, like verifiable proof that kind of you write code that's secure and it won't cause any trouble down the road. And as David mentioned, there's the SAPI library. And then, do you want to just give a brief overview on what that is? Cool, thanks. Yeah, before I just go on to the next slide, is there any questions people have on SOQL injection in general? Anything, I guess, field level security at all? If not, then go here. I don't know if we want to transition here or if I'll just read it off. Just some upcoming events. We have Midwest Streaming, August 10th through 11th, as well as Dreamforce coming up. So that'll be a good time. Oh, did you want to? Okay. Ah, yes. Ooh, should we come up with some questions?
Yeah, so we have a couple, I guess we're gonna come up with a couple questions here, and we got 2 more lanterns to give away, so.
Oh, we gave away all the way.
No, we have 2 more. Putting you on the spot here.
All right, who could name 2 ways to prevent SOQL injection in your code? Yep, good. Toss or lantern.
All right, let me try to think of something with cross-site scripting. Yeah. In the very beginning of my slide, what is one of the security concerns you do not have to be concerned about with Salesforce? What's that? I'll take that. I was looking for cross-site request forgery, but you're right. Since you only have to do select statements, you can't delete or manipulate data directly with SOQL.
All right, I got another one here for kind of consolation prize because we don't have anything left. What are the 2 key modifiers in your Apex that make your Apex respect profile permissions and sharing rules and stuff like that? With sharing, yep. I'm not sure if you talked about this too, but another thing to consider when you're developing Visualforce is like extensions don't respect field level security. So that's where that is accessible and is creatable methods. They come in handy with extensions as well. So it's something that I routinely forget and other developers routinely forget. So make sure you're checking for that, because that's one of the things that the that code scanner app that was mentioned before will catch and complain about. So another event I think that I don't know if you mentioned, Dreamforce, of course, is November 6th and November 9th. It's pretty much booked up already. Hotels are insanely expensive and unavailable. But we'll probably have a couple more, maybe another event or something when it comes near November to kind of go over those presentations. Last year we did a kind of a pre-speaker event here, so or in the developer group. So be on the lookout for that. And anyway, thanks everyone for coming out, and especially thanks to Magnet 360 for hosting, and Raphael in particular for kind of pushing Andy and I to get this thrown together here. So appreciate that, and thank you.